Patrick Creighton with you, late hits, ESPN 97.5, and joining us right now on the HRMP hotline, noted national sports law analyst Dan Lust. What's going on, Dan? How you doing?
I'm good, Pat. I'm listening to you guys. I mean, listen, all hope is not lost with Bill O'Brien. I mean, maybe there's a lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress there. You never know.
I'll go round up as many people as you need to file that. Whatever it takes, man. Whatever it takes.
I think after that Kansas City Chiefs loss in the playoffs, I'm primed for it. I'll be your star witness and everything.
Listen, it sounds good. Listen, that's what lawyers are here for.
Save us, Dan. You're our only hope. So there's been a lot of legal stuff going around with Major League Baseball. There's been lawsuits. There's been, discussions between the league and the Players Association regarding, is there going to be a season? What happens if there is a season? What happens if there's not a season? I guess let's start with the fact that there's been, a DFS lawsuit against Major League Baseball that's had attorneys from the Red Sox, attorneys from the Astros, speaking at this trial where they were talking about, what did the team do? What does the team admit to doing? How did it affect the game? Like the DFS guys trying to say that, the sign stealing was such a major impact on the game. It created a non-level playing field. They want money and damages and all that stuff. Now, my understanding is the latest on that. There's been a dismissal. Dan, what's going on with that lawsuit?
So it's good news for Houston Astros fans, Red Sox fans, and Major League Baseball. So I guess the long and short of this lawsuit, DFS players, daily fantasy sports users, were trying to say that this was a fraud intentionally committed by the Astros and the Red Sox, and Major League Baseball was aware of this and didn't do anything to stop it. So if those allegations sound kind of phony and they sound, just throwing darts, that's what the court viewed here. They said that these allegations, be it as they may, you can allege anything you want, but at the end of the day, you have to have teeth to a lawsuit to prevail. So what the court said is, listen, these DFS users, they can feel aggrieved all they want, but they are at least a couple levels removed away from, maybe players, right? Players have a relationship with the league, and the league has a relationship with the teams. But where do DFS users fall into that? I mean, you have to get all the way to DraftKings, and you have to get to the user base. So what the court really said is that maybe there could be a lawsuit in here, but it's not going to be brought by a DFS user. This is just, in the words of the user, too attenuated to have a real causal, to have a claim here. The relationship between the actual alleged acts, the sign stealing, and DFS users who could be all over the country, there's just no action there. So the court swiftly, in a very early dismissal, and I think from the legal perspective, this is dismissed as against the Astros, the Red Sox, and Major League Baseball. And Pat, because I'm from New York, where this case was venued in the federal court, I know exactly where this building is. Most cases have been shut down. A lot of judges are working from home, and the courts are moving very slowly. But the court here thought it important enough to put this to the top of the list and give this a very, very early dismissal. So I think this bodes well for the Astros in this litigation moving forward.
Now, Dan, you were on with us a couple weeks ago, and we talked about this idea of, what happens with this thing. What happens if, it were to go forward, and you kind of gave the the can of worms going down the rabbit hole scenario of all the different things that could potentially happen. So all that stuff is now out the window.
Not necessarily. So I don't want to say it's not, but when I was on with you a couple weeks back, I had said that it was in the context of no lawsuits had been filed at that point. It was just Mike Fiers, saying whatever he wanted to say. But the fact that there are a number of lawsuits, any one of them can open up this can of worms. And this can of worms, when I say that when we were on way back when, I was saying that when you have a lawsuit, this allows you a period of open discovery, and you can ask for depositions of any number of people. Right, Pat? We're seeing in the Mike Bolsinger case that he's trying to depose Jim Crane. You can ask for depositions. You're not necessarily going to get them, but sometimes you do. Sometimes the court's going to allow that. So across the country, right, there's a number of different cases that the Astros are dealing with. But what I will say is that this case, even though it's a New York case, even though it's the lowest federal court, the Southern District of New York, the Astros, their attorneys are going to rely on this case in every jurisdiction, and they're going to say, listen, there's a season ticket holders lawsuit against the Astros in Texas. They're going to point to this New York decision, even though it's not binding because it's from a different state and it's from a lower court. They're going to say, hey, look at this judge in New York. They made this decision. It's the same exact fact. It's another ticket holder. It's the DFS users, but, they're citing to case law that revolves around ticket holders. There's this case I know we spoke about, Pat, where a Jets fan sued the Patriots out of Spygate because they said that the Patriots reduced the value of their season tickets. That was a case that was cited in the DFS decision that we had today. So I could very much see the Houston case with respect to the season ticket fans, season ticket holders suing the Astros here locally in Houston. I could see them just pointing to this New York decision and saying, hey, that case was dismissed and they relied on the same precedent. So I think that's going to be used around the country, Pat. So if it's my gut, I think it's very possible that this is one domino that could lead to a very favorable defense for the Astros.
The best part about that is Jets fans thinking their tickets are worth value. He's Dan Luss, national sports law analyst, with us on the HRMP hotline. Dan, now that stuff is good news for baseball that this has been thrown out. Now I guess they have a precedent of saying, like you said, hey, look, it happened over here. So now when you make your decision, you have to explain why this judge is wrong and you're right.
Exactly.
Now, when it comes to the season, the Baseball and the Players Association, they had to have another almost addendum to their own agreement of how they're going to proceed with this year. How does this all break down? Are we going to get baseball this year? Do you think we get baseball this year? And what are the ramifications if we don't?
So there's a lot to unpack, and it's funny. So I'm probably like you, Pat. I'm on Twitter every day, just looking and seeing if any of these sports are going to go forward. There's a website that I look at. It's called Sports Innovation Labs. They track every cancellation, postponement, and let's just say it's looking bleak, right? Wimbledon's gone, the Kentucky Derby's gone. It's every day we're losing something. So I will give baseball credit for this. Baseball is the only sport that I've seen that has really come up with a contingency plan and really spelled out exactly what they need to happen for baseball to return in terms of safetiness. And number two, what will happen if the season's canceled, right? What exactly is going to happen? So on the first level, I think this is pretty interesting. So what baseball came up with, I'm calling it an interim labor agreement and addendum. It's the same concept. They said three things need to happen before the season can restart. Number one, there are no bans on mass gatherings that limit the ability to play in front of fans. Okay, makes sense. There are no travel restrictions. I mean, Pat, I'm in New York. New Yorkers weren't allowed to go into the state of Rhode Island as of last week. So, yeah, I mean, you can imagine that could be an issue if that pops up in other states. Number three, the last one, medical experts determine that games will not pose a risk to health of teams and fans. Those are good guidelines, but they're pretty amorphous, right? When will doctors say it's safe for fans to return to games? I mean, it's anyone's best guess. So that's the guidance they put out there. But I think the second part of this is really interesting. So worst case scenario, right? The season is canceled. What happens in that sense? I know I talk about it a lot on Twitter, these force majeure clauses. What exactly happens if the season's canceled? Well, number one, if you're just force majeure clause, let's say we take it out of sports and we're having a wedding, right? There's just a bride and groom. They book this venue. A force majeure clause in that contract really wipes out the obligation of both sides. The wedding doesn't have to, put forward the different employees, and the other side doesn't have to pay. So putting that back in the sports context, if the season's canceled, Major League Baseball teams don't have to pay the players. That's pretty much how cancellation works. It's this national emergency clause in player contracts. But what does that really mean? I mean, well, the players could sue, and they could say, well, we deserve to get paid and all this stuff. So what did baseball do? I think it was really smart. The owner said, listen, players, even if the season's canceled, we're going to front you guys $170 million for April and May. You guys we'll figure out how to divvy it up, but we're going to pay you $170 million. You're not going to be left without change. And from the baseball perspective, Pat, the last part that I think is really interesting, there's a ton of stuff to break down. But what they said was for player contracts, these contracts are actually going to continue moving forward. So a guy like Mookie Betts, who was supposed to play his contract year in 2020, he's actually going to be a free agent in 2021. So there's a scenario where the Dodgers never have Mookie Betts in their uniform before he hits the free agent market.
That's almost karma. for all the BS that they talk. That really is. It's almost karma. Now, it's really interesting because, Mookie Betts, of course, huge trade in the offseason, and the Dodgers, for all their running of the mouth about, the Astros were cheaters, they stole a World Series from us. Well, they acquired a guy from a team that was being investigated for the exact same thing, who also beat them in the World Series and won an MVP, but they're really silent about that. So it's almost like they deserve it. But that being said, Betts is just one of the biggest names of guys. Here locally, there's a handful of guys who would be free agents at the end of the year, which, all that stuff gets impacted. For guys like A.J. Hinch and for Jeff Luhnow, is the fact, like, we've seen the reports that if there's no season, their suspension will eventually it'll be considered fulfilled. Is that because the Players Association and the league have basically determined that all contracts will, it'll basically, everything will be like the contract was fulfilled, the league was played, they didn't have the game, but the season effect happened?
That's what I'm seeing. I mean, I'm reading the same reports you are. I think nothing official, but I saw the report on ESPN that that's what baseball was at least leaning towards at this point. But, in the world we live in, I've seen it a number of times. A story gets leaked a little bit, it trickles out, and then they watch the public response, and then they might go the other direction. So let's break down where that's coming from the contractual perspective, putting on our legal thinking hats. What Manfred did in that decision, I mean, you could disagree with the decision, you could agree with it, but at the end of the day, the decision is what it is. He's the commissioner. He makes the rules. He said that Luhnow and Hinch's punishment will end the day following the 2020 World Series. So, I've talked a lot about the NBA at different points. They plan for a potential epidemic. It's in their collective bargaining agreement about a canceled season. That's why they have some contingency. Manfred's punishment doesn't talk about anything. There's no contingencies. There's nothing. It just says the day after the 2020 World Series. So what happens in a season where there is no 2020 World Series? Does that mean that the punishment logically meant 365 days? Well, no, it says a World Series. Could it mean the next World Series? I mean, as a reasonable person and as an attorney, I would probably read that as meaning the following World Series, whenever that is, because the intent behind the punishment, and I think everyone would agree, it's for Luhnow and Hinch to sit on the sidelines while a full season of baseball is played without them. But nevertheless, I'm not in charge. It looks like that's what Manfred is leaning towards, letting them come back in 2021 and effectively saying, there's going to be no detriment to you because all of baseball is sitting out. Now, Pat, I will bring up one interesting point where I'm not seeing many people talking about this, but you mentioned the Red Sox briefly. So I'll call this. I'm saying this. It's not you. I think if Hinch and Luhnow, they get out, I think it's kind of on a technicality that Manfred kind of messed up the wording, right? If you just said one World Series, it would have been a little different. But it's me saying this, not you. I think it's a little bit of a technicality, but it is what it is. The problem for Manfred moving forward, Manfred hasn't issued any punishment to the Red Sox yet. And we saw in this DFS lawsuit, I was combing through the transcripts, the Red Sox lawyer is apparently aware that the Red Sox there is some punishment that's out there, just not being reported yet. The findings have been done. So, and I think that's official, that their report has been done. He just hasn't put pen to paper yet, Manfred. The problem in waiting now, what's Manfred going to do if let's assume the Red Sox executives get punished in some way, shape, or form, which looks like it's trending to be the case. What's he going to say? Well, I'm going to punish them, but it's actually going to be it's going to be a zero punishment because the season's canceled anyway, so it doesn't matter. So I think he's kind of worked himself into a corner here, right? He kind of has to do whatever he's leaning toward with the Astros, or else that would be unfair. And if he were to give the Red Sox, if he were to just switch course and say the next World Series, then all of a sudden the Red Sox are getting more punishment than the Astros. So I'm very fascinated to see how he deals with this Red Sox thing because from a wording perspective, terminology, he's kind of worked himself to a corner. I don't really know how he gets out of this without giving the Red Sox exactly what the Astros got.
So really all we need right now is like Darth Vader to look at Rob Manfred and go, your failure is now complete.
We joked about this, Pat, but I didn't see a way for baseball to come out looking worse out of all this, but I think they found a way.
That is awesome. He's Dan Lust, national sports law analyst. You hear him here with us on ESPN. You see him on all ESPN platforms, CBS, Fox Sports. He's everywhere. One of the rising star attorneys in the country in the sports and entertainment field. Follow him on Twitter at SportsLawLust.